presentation by Dennis Dosso. It's a short paper, so we'll have 10 minutes.
Right.
Great. Okay, we can see your screen. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So, hello everyone. I'm Dennis Dosso. I am a postdoc researcher at the University of Padua. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about data credit distribution. So I will very quickly discuss about data citation and one of its limits. I will talk about data credit, how we performed our experiments, and then we will conclude with our future work. So, data citation. We already saw during this edition of IRCDL that we today live in the fourth paradigm of science. Data are very important for our research. And for this reason, we need to be able to use data in our papers, but also to be able to cite them. In particular, we need to treat data in the same way, possibly, in which we treat regular scientific publication. We need to be able to cite them. Of course, data citation is a work in progress. We are still working on the protocols, on the tools, on the software, and there are, of course, some limits to it. One of these limits is that we cite what we see. What do I mean by this? Well, when we perform a data citation, we are using a query. This query produces an output, and we are citing that output. Of course, oftentimes what happens with queries is that they use more data with respect to the one that we see in the output. So when we cite the output of a query, we are not citing all the data that have been used by the query itself. So those data and all the authors and data curators that have worked on those data, they do not receive any citation, or more in general, any form of reward for their work. So what can we do about this? This is our idea to try to overcome this limitation: credit, and data credit distribution. So we start from a database, from a query on this database, identifying data that we are trying to cite, and from credit. Now, credit is simply a real value which is describing the importance of this citation. So, for example, we have a paper, we have a data citation in this paper. The credit represents somehow the impact, the importance, the relevance of this citation in the economy, in the overall economy of a paper. Now, in this context, we are considering credit as given. We are not focusing on how to compute it. There are different ways to do that. Now, the first thing that we do is to compute the data provenance. So provenance is a form of metadata for data, and it helps to understand how data was created, from where it comes from, its life cycle. And there are different forms of data provenance, but we focus on the forms of data provenance that help us to understand from where the data are coming, which parts of the input database are responsible for the production of the output. Once we have this provenance, we can compute what we call distribution strategy. It is a function, it is a plan, if we want to call it in this way, that help us to understand how to distribute this credit into the database. That is, we have this quantity of credit, this budget, if we want, we divide it in portions, and we annotate the data in the database, only the data that are relevant, that were used by the query, with this credit. And as I was saying, there are different types of data provenance, and in particular, we focus on lineage, one of the first types of provenance that were defined. It is defined as the set of all and only the data in the input database that had a role in the production of the output. And in the case of relational databases that we use for our experiment, the lineage is defined as the set of all and only the tuples in the input database that have a role, whatever that may be, in the query that produced the output. So for our experiments, what do we need? Well, we need two things. We need a database to cite, and we need the citations to this database. We use as a database the IUFAR Guide to Immunopharmacology, which is a quite famous database in the medical field, curated and maintained by people at the University of Edinburgh. It contains information about disease, about genes, ligands, targets, things like that. It is quite known, it is maintained, it has its own website and web pages that are used by researchers. For the citations, we use the papers coming published in the British Journal of Pharmacology. And why exactly this journal and not another one? Because it has a very nice policy, at least for us. If you want to publish a paper in this journal, and this paper uses data or information taken from web pages of the IUFAR database, you need to put the URL of this web page in these papers. It is mandatory. So we can use these URLs to reverse engineer the SQL queries that are used to automatically produce the web pages of IUFAR. So we can, with this process, with a little bit of reverse engineering, we can obtain something which is as close as possible to real-life queries, to real-life data citations. And so we perform our tricks, we do our computations, and this is one of our outputs. What you see here are 3 heat maps. Each heat map corresponds to one relation in the IUFAR relational database. Each cell is a tuple, and the color represents the quantity of credit that we were able to annotate to these tuples. So we were able to annotate this information, this credit, to each tuple. The more the credit, the darker the shade of color of the tuples. So as you can see, we were able to annotate this database to find the elements that are relevant in the context of citations defined by the papers published in the British Journal of Pharmacology. And in particular, it is interesting to note, at least for me, that there is a Pareto distribution here. Few tuples are the ones that are used the most, that have the higher impact in the research carried on in the British Journal of Pharmacology. From another point of view, we have this slide. So what is the idea here? In the same way in which when we cite a paper, we are also assigning one citation to the authors of this paper, we can do the same thing with credit. So when we assign credit to data, we are also able to assign this credit to the authors of this data. We are able to do this because this information is present in IUFAR. We know the authors of the data. So on the left-hand side, we see a radar plot with the top 10 authors who receive the highest quantity of citations coming from the papers from the British Journal. On the right-hand side, we see the top 10 authors credit-wise. And as you can see, if you receive a lot of citations, it is not necessarily true that you also receive a lot of credit, and vice versa. Now, I didn't go in the detail on how we compute credit, how we distribute it, but the idea that I want to convey here is that credit behaves differently from citations. What does this mean? That there are certain citations that are more impactful in the generation and distribution of credit. There are some cases when a citation is more important, generates more credit for its authors than other types of citations. So credit is able to reveal a different perspective, a different point of view in the study of bibliometrics, in the study of research impact of data and its authors in a context, in this case, the context of a British Journal of Pharmacology, but we could extend this to other contexts, other situations. So to conclude, I already explained a lot of conclusions. So we see how data credit can be used as a new tool to use alongside traditional citations It is flexible. It allows to solve some problems of traditional citations in the context of data. It allows us to understand, as we see, some interesting points inside a database, the so-called hotspots of a database. And since now we have this information annotated to the different parts of a database, we can carry on different types of tasks. So for example, the data pricing task, when I want, for example, to give a price to my data. If someone wants to buy my data and I put a lot of work in my database, but maybe I can sell it to this person. And with this annotation, with this credit, I can understand or help the process of understanding how to assign a price to my data. And this is all from me. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Perfectly on time. Any quick question, since it's we are a little bit late, but still within the time frame? Okay. If no, just a curiosity. I know you skipped all the details about how you compute the credit, but how about, is there any negative credit in your model?
For now, not.
Mm-hmm.
But we can put it, another task. So I talked about data pricing, but there is another type of task that is called data reduction or something like that, which is studied by Tovamilo, for example, among others, and is the task of removing data from a storage. So maybe you have an evolving database that is becoming very big. You don't want to keep all that stuff. You may want to get rid of some data. You may think about introducing negative credit to understand not the hotspots, but the cold spots, which can be, for example, removed.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we have ended this session.